Okay, looks like we're live. So we will pull in a couple of comments from the chat, most likely. And let's go ahead and start once I'm able to validate. Yeah, okay, so we are live for sure. Okay, so this is the first video that I've put up after the earlier video, which is better known as the Don't Panic video during the OGL, which turned out to be probably more accurate, calling it the Don't Panic video, since that was sort of the first line that I said, which turned out to be more true than I think anybody ever imagined. Because at the moment we're about to be at a better place than we were before Wizards of the Coast made their effort to deauthorize the OGL. So before we even start talking specifically about Swords and Wizardry or about the Mythmere license, let's just do a quick recap on where we stand right now in terms of the intellectual property. The Wizards decided that what they would do would be to drop the SRD for 5th edition, it's the SRD 5.1, into the Creative Commons license. And the particular Creative Commons license that they chose was one that was that does not contain very many restrictions at all. There are other versions of the Creative Commons license which would require anybody publishing anything using open content to make their own content as open as what it was that they were using, and Wizards didn't choose one of those. It's available for commercial use. So with respect to the material that they have dropped in, that's actually probably more useful than having things in the actual open game license. They haven't dropped everything in yet, although they've said that they are going to drop the SRDs from 3rd edition in there as well. And once that gets in there, I would actually say we're in a better place than we were before January. And for various reasons and with different effects for different publishers. But so we've actually moved forward and are in a I think a better place. It is going to require a lot of reorganization on a lot of people's part, because I think that this is going to cause a lot of people to migrate away from the OGL, which is what we're going to do with Swords and Wizardry, and more about that down the road. And there are various reasons for it. I do think you're going to see a migration away from the OGL, but at least at this point in time, everybody who's got books sitting in warehouses is not at risk. They can continue to sell those books. People can continue to publish under the OGL. The big issue being people who were using OGL intellectual property that was contributed by somebody else to the OGL. Are going to be able to continue doing that even if the original publisher has gone away. That will be a problem at any point in the future if and when they cancel the OGL. So in terms of the recap, I think that's where we are now, is that we're positioned in a better place. And here we're talking about both the OSR and also the 5th edition publishers. At least we will be in a better place once the material from the 3rd edition SRD gets dropped in there. We've probably lost a bunch of the pure gamer audience who were looking for information on the Kickstarter with lots and lots of legalese. This video is going to be filled with a lot of legalese and will mostly be of interest to publishers and freelancers, just as a warning. So if anybody has any general questions about the Kickstarter, go ahead and throw those in the comments now, because you're probably not going to be interested in sticking all the way through to the end of the video, because it's simply not really relevant to gamers, other than those gamers who are creating content for other people to use. So hello, everybody. I've got Uncle Brat, Sea Bears, RAR, Jonathan Bingham from New Zealand. Jonathan has done a lot of work for Swords and Wizardry in the past. He's an artist, very, very talented guy. Javier Chiosi, Michael Anderson, Jack Dandy, Dados Tostados, Dave Rosser, Frederick Rourke, General Nutt, Wonky. Hey, Wonky, I'm glad to see you here. Wonky is Keelan Halverson, also a very, very talented artist. Is Skeeter's here. Hey, Skeeter. Mark Faulkner, Johnny White, Joe Salvador, Travis Miller, and there I've caught up with my chat list, and I'm going to stop reading, because otherwise all I'll be doing is reading names. So for everybody who has posted so far, thank you very much for coming to the stream. Let's talk about a little bit about what the future is going to look like. first, we should say the orc license, which Paizo and others are working on, um, is in progress. I know that they're passing drafts around, and I guess probably one of the early things to say is that we're not putting this license out in any way as a general competition with the orc license. What's going to happen here in this phase is there will probably be a few different license schemes that go out there, and then the community is probably going to pick and choose one or two of those, and there may even be a synthesis process where one of those licenses has some sort of flaw without which it would be really perfect, and you may see a change in that or someone else coming out with it. So the thing is, nothing that's being done at this point is going to end up being the ultimate solution for licensing. We're likely to see a few iterations and attempts to get something that everyone agrees on. This is being put out there because for our purposes, I would like to get a license out there that is very similar to the OGL for various reasons. I do have a one question on here. If we purchase the $35 reward level for the printed book, can we add in the modules? Yes, I believe that you can. What'll happen is when you put in your pledge, Kickstarter begins immediately pestering you for whichever add-ons it is that are attached to that thing. And I believe that the modules, the printed modules and the PDFs are both available as add-ons on any printed tier. So that one is there. The need more options on Kickstarter. Yeah, the problem with Kickstarter is that if you put in too many tiers, you begin to get people who come to it and they get tired of reading the tiers and get confused. So we've put a lot of the things into the add-ons on the Kickstarter for that. So and yeah, you don't need to give any payment information to get a copy of this draft. This is simply the easiest way for us to get it out there. And keep in mind, this is only a draft. In fact, it was pointed out to me that we've even got a misnumbering problem in some of the sections, and I'm going to need to go back in and add the bit about if there is a later draft of this license, you can use any of the things that were released for others, because this is an irrevocable license. That goes out, so we have to have some way of, if there is a big problem with it and we need to come out with another version, we don't want people who released something under the prior version to then have their stuff not available, with those two things being two separate licenses. One of the main points, so a couple of things. One thing that I've addressed without really putting a name on it is that we're in the phase of things where there's the law of unforeseen consequences, which is going to be happening with licenses. How they will interact, if you make a mistake on something because there is a particular use that it can be put to, you know this is going to be a feature of the licensing landscape probably for at least the next 6 months, and licenses don't change rapidly. I mean, take a look at how long it has taken. There's not even a draft of the orc license out there. I'm one lawyer. I have passed the draft back and forth with Mark Greenberg. It has taken us this long, since January, with just two people. So this is going to be a slow and evolving process, the licensing thing. But it shouldn't stop anyone from doing publishing in the interim. So the first thing is law of unforeseen consequences. The second thing I'd like to talk about now is about the use of licenses in tandem, which we have not seen um, in the gaming landscape very much at all at this point, because everything was done under the OGL. So let's talk for a second about the fact this Swords and Wizardry license is actually being used in tandem with the Creative Commons license, because the intellectual property from Wizards that is being used to create the Swords and Wizardry rule set is now coming from, arguably coming from, in any case, the Creative Commons grant from Wizards of the Coast. And so, however, we are not releasing the Swords and Wizardry material under the Creative Commons license, because we're going to hold on to product identity and make it easier for another publisher down the chain from us to protect their product identity. And here we're using terms from the OGL, which are the same terms going to be used in the Mythmere license. The biggest problem with the Creative Commons license is just that you really need to isolate, or rather, you need to separate out the material that you're releasing as open content, and separating that out usually requires some sort of digital draft, which is, certainly within our capabilities, but may not be within the capabilities of somebody who just wants to release a single monster as a fan of some game system, or release it in multiple game systems. Asking that person, the one fan, to create a separate digital document in order to protect something, his name or his trademark that he's got, is asking a little bit much. And so that's one of the reasons why we're following in the along the model of the OGL, which has been a very successful license. It's been around for 20 years. There's been virtually no litigation in the gaming industry, which is a highly litigious environment under ordinary circumstances. So the OGL is a real success in that, by that measure. And so along the theory of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, here is our offering of the if it ain't broke, don't fix it model of moving forward. And like I said, there will be multiple licenses coming across. The discussion will get ever more useful when people have an actual example to say, here is a license that's got a good term in it. It would be really neat if that term were in this license over here. So again, there is going to be a lot of changing landscape over the next 6 months or so, but it's all moving forward very positively. I think we've gotten past what the real risk was, which was that deauthorization attempt. So licensing in tandem. So you can think of anyone who is publishing something as having an inbound license and then an outbound license. And so for Swords and Wizardry, the inbound license is the Creative Commons license. The outbound license is the Swords and Wizardry license, which follows more along the model of the OGL. And for anyone who has actually taken a look at that draft, it also, if you are using material from the Swords and Wizardry SRD, which you don't have to, because you can use this license just to publish a completely different game entirely. But if you are using the Swords and Wizardry intellectual property, we strongly recommend, because it only costs you about 4 lines of text, that you also make the required reference back to the Creative Commons grant from Wizards of the Coast. But if you're not using the stuff where we used that Creative Commons grant, then you wouldn't have to. So let's talk about a few of the provisions in here. Number one, and the obvious one, is that in section number 2, which will probably remain section 2 since that's not part of the numbering mistake that I made, we do have the word irrevocable, which is probably the single most important thing to cover in any license that is trying to follow the general approach of the OGL. So there is that one. In the first section 3 that we've got here, usage, it's probably worth pointing out that we specifically say, and this is something that lawyer to lawyer goes without saying, but there are a few places in this license where I've put in a little bit more standard English to explain to somebody what's being done there. When we finally come out with the final version of the license, there'll also be a little, guidebook sort of thing to show you what it ought to look like. There will still be a designation of open game content section. There will still be, the notice about, this license, this work contains open game content from the license, blah, blah, blah. Those, we'll talk a little more about that in the notice provisions, but it does specifically say in usage that you are allowed to release material under as many licenses as you want, as long as you're not adding or subtracting any terms and not violating any of the rights of the upstream contributors in there. And I think we've clarified how upstream and downstream contribution works a little bit better than the way that the OGL was drafted. Um, the with the second number three, which will become number four, um, is just a clarification that you. Um, oh no, actually, reading it, that this is that's pretty much straight uh, from the OGL. Um, Somewhere in here, what I thought was in that section, based on the thinking back, was the bit. It does make clear in this license also something that wasn't clear um, in general conversation just after the launch of the original OGL in year 2000. You, if you're using this license, you do not actually have to create or release any new open game content. It's not a requirement that you include open game content. And there's sort of a divide between the people who open license advocates who want to force people to give something into the community, as opposed to the people who are like, it doesn't matter, you don't have to force people, just do it by choice. I'm in that second group of don't force people, just do it by choice. um, so in if you're using this license, you don't have to contribute any open game content of your own. And we also specify in this contract that something that was ambiguous in the OGL, if it is not clearly designated as open game content, it's going to be treated like product identity. um, I think that the OGL, as it was, actually, since they left that open, there was actually a potential third category of intellectual property in those licenses, in things created under that license, which were neither product identity nor open game content. To remove that ambiguity, if it's not clearly delineated as being open game content, it's going to be treated like a product identity. Um, and there are several little fixes in there. And I would like very much to thank Mark Greenberg for taking a look at this draft and helping me sand off some of the rough edges. It's been a long time since I did any formal contract drafting. People who know me know I haven't practiced law for well over 20 years, and Mark has much more recently than that, and is probably a better draftsman than I am, even on my best day. Um, uh, so there's that, and then did the best we could to clarify what happens when you're using multiple licenses, but we're leaving open that possibility, and hopefully other people who do draft other licenses will leave that open. Um, Let me step back for just a second to say something about licenses in general. The reason that this is a relatively complex and legalistic license is because it creates a sort of intellectual property that you can think of as being open game content usable by anyone. You can do a much simpler, clearer license, like the one for Morkborg, and I think the one for Shadow Dark, um, in which the publisher, which in this case would be me, lets any other publisher use the material to publish a thing. And then if you're done, you've got a fairly simple license. The problem is, what if one of those publishers wants to use something that's created by another one of those publishers? And that's not covered in the shorter uh, one tier, or rather two tier license like Morkborg and Shadow Dark, because all that you've got, you don't have that peer-to-peer aspect to it. So that's the reason why this, and why the OGL and why the ORC license are more legalistic, is because you have a lot more to get done in terms of setting things up. So just so people are aware, there are simpler licenses out there, but what they don't create is that open game content form of intellectual property, which is really largely not important to most publishers, because publishers don't tend to use open game content from other publishers. Who it's important for are the fan publishers, the people who want to put out one dungeon or one monster, in sort of fan to fan type of stuff, or very very small publishing house or starting up publishing house, and that's a to me that's a very very vital group in the industry. And it gets difficult for them if they can't use, because you get projects coming out, like Rob Conley's Wilderlands and so on and so forth, where you have multiple people contributing to it from different sources, and having an open game content sort of category of intellectual property for those people to draw on is very important. Moving on, let me check real quick over here. So the dual license is like how we included the OGL and the OSRIC reference. Kind of, yeah. We have seen dual licenses in the sense of trademark compatibility licenses. Um, but really those kind of did two different things. One of them had to do with your ability to use the intellectual property, and the other one had to do with your ability to describe the intellectual property when it used somebody else's trademark. What we're doing in trademarks in this one, I was originally going to go directly with the OGL on this one, and Mark Greenberg suggested, well, wait a second. One of the things that the OGL does is it very much restricts your ability to use fair use in trademarks. And so he suggested that why don't you clip it down to where fair use of trademarks is not something that's prohibited under the license. And I said, okay, I think that's fair, but here's another wrinkle to throw in there, which is that I do think, since we're not going to put any sort of morality clause in there, not having a morality clause can be something that causes people to stay away from a license because they're worried that somebody that they don't like is going to publish something using their work, and the mud's going to spatter on them, whether you're talking about left or right. This is the fear that publishers have. And so what we did put in there was basically requiring that people put in a disclaimer about the contributors that whose work they're using. And that disclaimer is basically that there is not any implied endorsement going on there that hasn't been reviewed by the other people, just to make it clear. This is an open license. It's not a situation where you got on the phone, your people talking to their people and hammered out an agreement where everybody knows each other or anything like that. So it gives that degree of separation, which I think will make people a little bit more comfortable, putting out open game content. It just because it creates a sort of a baffle. So that's how we did that. So we have allowed much more use of people's trademarks. So, for example, under this, you'd be able to say, this, this work is compatible with, name of some other game, provided that it doesn't constitute fraud. You would actually want it to be compatible with that other game, and provided that you have separated yourself from the identity of that other company. In other words, you're not using their logos, you're not making yourself look like them, you're making it clear, look, we are different from them, but this is a product that is intended to be compatible. So it is like the trademark license put on top of the open game license, but it's also somewhat different. Here we're talking about using two different licenses to draw on intellectual property from two different sources in a way that you're not violating either one of those two licenses. You can use more than one license at a time, and I think we're going to see more of that. And I think it's going to there's probably going to be an art to it, and hopefully someone will get out there and say, this is more specific examples about this is what you can do, this is what you can do. Right now we're talking very much in generalities, and hopefully I'm not being so vague that I can't even be followed, but if so, I apologize for that. The notices are very similar to the way that the OGL works. You will be reprinting the whole license, and I'm going to see if I can find some way around that, but thus far I have not found a good way around the reprinting of the whole license. Yes, you can do a link, but a lot of the times you want to have that there so that you can see the list of contributors. So at the moment we're going with, you're going to reprint the whole license. There will still be the little disclaimer, the little thing at the front saying, if you're using it it's under the terms of the license. It'll have that notification in there you're not affiliated with the other contributors, and that is new, like I just talked about. And so and then also, we already talked about the fact that if you're using the Swords and Wizardry SRD, which we'll put up once we're done with the license, that you're going to want to also put in the Creative Commons attribution. And that's really where I'm talking about the dual licenses, is that you'll put in one attribution under the Creative Commons license, but here also is the second license that we're using, the Swords and Wizardry one. We've already talked about how we're restricting fair use somewhat less. We have talked about the separation, the fact that it's either product identity or open game content. It'll be presumed to be open. It'll be presumed to be product identity if it's not clear. The number 6, as it's numbered here, it'll be number 7 is the one that you don't actually need to contribute. Number 8 is one that is unfortunately very filled with legal jargon, privity of contract. What that is talking about. So let's say that Mythmere Games publishes this license, and then down the road I get hit by a bus, website closes down, so on and so forth. What happens if there's a dispute under the license? Plus, I don't want to be stepping in to each and every dispute that happens. So what privity of contract is that is the question of who can have a legal dispute with somebody else, whether it's a lawsuit or whatever. And the thing here is that it's a chain. Whoever originally contributed that intellectual property, and everybody downstream, and then whoever it is that used it, and that's it. So a person who is under the license but is not in that chain of contributors is not somebody who can sue somebody else about the use of it, nor can they be sued about it. And so that's really all that one does, which is why it's short. And I did put in any dispute here under, which Mark did point out is redundant, because you don't ever address privity of contract unless there is a dispute. But by putting in the case of any dispute here under, it's at least clear to a non-lawyer reader what we're talking about here is when a dispute arises, and it helps you put it in the framework, because I do realize this stuff is incredibly hard to read if you're not familiar with reading contract documents. And hopefully the little guidelines that we put out with it will make it a lot easier, because people are generally familiar with these terms if they've been publishing under the OGL. It's just that as soon as you start making little changes to it, figuring out exactly what was changed can be difficult there. And then inability to comply, I believe, is pretty much the exact same provision that's in the OGL. And then termination pretty much works the same. And then the unenforceability stuff. So that's basically the real quick, ripping speed through what it is that we've got. There will be more changes, probably not significant ones by the time we're done, but I did want to get the community out there to get a look at this. Is the when I say that it's going to operate like the OGL, I wanted to put a concrete example out in front of people, just so that you can get a sense of how much is it like the OGL, how much is it different from the OGL. So with that, let me swing through here and see the question is, what do you feel to be the best for OSR or RPG scene in general? One true license to rule them all, the communities flock to for simplicity, or the spread out to multiple licenses? I think that there are two different answers depending on whether you're talking about new games or a proliferation of resources for the games. With new games, I think that the OGL has been somewhat restrictive, because there's always been the sense that if you're not publishing under the OGL, that you're kind of a fly-by-night homebrew sort of thing, unless you prove otherwise. So if you're a fan of innovative new RPG systems, my general feeling is that you're probably going to be a little bit better served back in the old days before the OGL was ever published. However, for general resources, even when it's for a large number of games, I think we would be better served having one license that pretty much everybody is behind. And hopefully we will find that the orc license does that. Nobody knows at this point. It's still in draft phase. Um, and it may be that it turns out to be what everyone is hoping for. My guess is that most of the lawyers and project managers who are out there in the world are aware that there's no way that it's going to please everybody in every way that they want to see. Simply because there are very few inventions in human history that are sliced bread and are the next best thing after sliced bread. Um, so, no matter how good it is, there are going to be some people who have some backlash against it. Um, you know, because of the provision in this license that you can publish under multiple licenses, there's nothing to stop somebody who has published something using the Swords and Wizardry license from then re-releasing it under the Orc license, and keeping both of those out there. It doesn't cause a problem for it. So, I wanted to leave it open for the possibility that we do have one license to rule them all, in which case it's very easy for people to move off of this one and into the large one. Um, but because I do think that the gaming community has greatly benefited in terms of resources rather than games, has greatly benefited from being under the OGL license. Um, and obviously, I pick a game and I stick with it forever. So I would be a person to have that viewpoint. But I also think that there's probably been some restriction of creativity that's gone on because of the OGL being out there. Um, All right. Question. I have a book, 95% written as an OGL book, and I've borrowed some text as is from other OGL books. Two examples being Swords and Wizardry White Box and The Hero's Journey. What do you feel is the best route forward for using this material? I'm currently operating on rewrite everything. Well, you raise an interesting point, because we could re-release at least Swords and Wizardry White Box under a new license, which would at least solve half your problem with that one. The Hero's Journey, James Spawn. I don't know what James and I have talked about this, but I don't really know what his plan is going forward. I'm not sure I would suggest rewriting everything, because it's not like everyone else isn't in the same boat. Everyone understands what the problems are for publishers who have used past OGL material. I mean, if you're only coming out with it in digital format, one of your options would be to simply release it under the OGL, wait for the licensed stuff to get done, and then do a print run once the license situation is a little clearer, because the OGL is not going away anytime soon. And the grants under both those games, are perpetual under the OGL. So if you're only thinking about a digital release, I would actually release that under the OGL for the time being. It's only when you lock money into a physical product, or the hassle of changing a POD book, that you really run into the issue of being widowed by a license like that. So that if you're only looking at a digital thing, then there's an easy answer to that. You're probably not, though, so that's probably not the best answer. But I would not plan on rewriting everything, though. There are probably going to be other options beside that. And then Frederick Rourke has actually answered with almost exactly the same thing that I just said. Go ahead and publish using the OGL. If the 3.5 SRD gets released as CC, as they are saying they're planning on doing, would that make it simpler for Joe or more complex? It leaves Joe in exactly the same situation, because what he's working with is something that was modified from the SRD using the OGL grants from Swords and Wizardry White Box. And part of the issue is that it's White Box, which is slightly different. and then Hero's Journey, which is also OGL, but that is not where the problem in that DM Tales does not lie in what content is available in the Creative Commons. The problem lies with the fact that he is presumably not wanting to stay with the OGL, but the resources that he's done his writing with are under the OGL, and so until those come out under uh, a new license, and he's still going to have to follow whatever those licenses might be. Um, that he his the work that he's done is sort of widowed right now, stuck in OGL world, which again, it's not dead. It's just that a lot of people are wanting to get away from it. But if temporarily you stay in the OGL, you can do that. That's certainly an option. Um, you do intend to do a print book. I figured that was probably the case. Um, so and the other thing too is to never forget the open license. The whole open license thing is a convenience. You can always get in contact with another publisher and say, hey, can I use your stuff? It's just that that is often inconvenient because that other publisher may be super busy at the time, not operating at internet speed. But that's always, you can always just make an agreement with somebody where they give you permission to do what you do, what you want to do. It's just that, if it becomes complicated, then you may want to have a lawyer involved, and that's cost. The cost is the lawyer cost is zero if you're using the OGL, unless you hire a lawyer to take a look at it for you. So the open game license is fast and it cuts costs, but there is always that other option of just pick up, the phone, give them a call and talk to them. So the so that, I believe, is that covers all of the topics that I wanted to do. Was just to sort of, we've put out the draft. It's an early draft. There will be changes to it. I very much appreciate any suggestions that people have. Um, we will come out with another draft, not immediately. This is something that we're going to let percolate for a while during the Kickstarter. Certainly, we'll come out with another draft, take comments on that draft, and then we will. As you can see from looking at the draft, the way we're going to do this is to release an SRD, a PDF that's got the artwork and the intellectual property stripped out of it, or it may have the intellectual property bracketed. But to get that out there, so that people can go ahead and start creating. If you are and mainly the reason is because the people that I'm trying to support here are the people who have a monster or something like that. This the very, very small micro publishers who are out there. This will give you the knowledge that this is something that you can go ahead and keep working on your stuff. No reason to stop or feel worried about it. It's going to happen. So to put some tangible evidence of the fact that that is going to happen out there, it would be possible. And I don't really. I think it's early for anyone to think about doing this yet, but it certainly would also be possible for somebody who was doing, Shadow Dark or Mork Borg resources. And again, this is, I think, something that people are going to have to realize in the future. It would be possible to publish a Mork Borg supplement using this Mythmere Games license, as long as you have also complied with the requirements, to do a Mork Borg product, and that is the thing that at the moment the only contender that I'm aware of out there for doing this sort of license is probably Orc. And although, like I said, I do support the idea of having one license to rule them all, I think it's also a good idea to have a couple of little alternatives out there, so that people can compare and contrast. So uh, there's the thing on that one. Reading the things. Will Mythmere, so Skeeter is asking, will Mythmere put out an example of how to use the MGL once it's all nailed down? Yes, we will. and we'll put in a couple of the different ways, for example, that you might handle open game content, because it'll probably either be, we want to let everybody use pretty much everything that's open game content, or we want to minimize the amount of open game content. And then the third one would be something like, here's how you describe this particular spell as open game content and nothing else is. So we'll have um, examples to where people won't have to look through all of the legalese in order to construct the things that happen outside of it. And it'll point, I think, to the different sections where things come from. One off-topic question: any plans for an official swords and wizardry setting under Mythmere? Um, there are, yes. We're almost certainly going to do one, just because I think a lot of people playing a game like to have a default setting that they can go to when they need to. We're not sure yet whether that'll be my old Jordiba setting or whether we'll construct something new. But yes, there is definitely, it's definitely something we're going to do. It's not something that we have any concrete plans actually in the works yet, unless we do Jordiba, in which case, obviously, I've got a lot of stuff already written for that. So that would be one of the faster ways to do. All right. And then it looks like that's it, guys. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up, unless we have any more questions. And I'll give it a couple of seconds to see if anyone posts any more questions on the chat. But like I said, this was planned to be a relatively boring and legalistic live stream. I think I've delivered on both boring and legalistic. And since I am not seeing any more questions cropping up on the chat, everyone, thank you very much for coming to listen to the description of the license. I hope it's helpful in terms of, if you're a publisher making plans, if you're a micro publisher or a fan, in terms of knowing that there will be a license out there that will let you publish your stuff and make it available for other people to see out there on the internet. And yeah, so with that, let me just say, imagine the hell out of it. Thank you for coming by, and we will talk later.